Why was the quiet medic the only one in the emergency room who wasn't rushing? The Naval Medical Center Emergency Department at Portsmouth was loud in the way places become loud when life and death share the same hallway. Monitors screamed. Wheels rattled across worn floors. Nurses moved quickly enough to blur at the edges. Voices bounced between curtains and metal trays. But in the corner near the supply station, one person stood still. Tessa Harlow. Small, quiet, almost invisible. At 27, she looked younger than she was. 5'4", barely more than 100 pounds. Hair pulled into a regulation bun so tight it looked permanent. Her name tag read Harlow in plain lettering with Korsman beneath it. Nothing about her invited attention. And that was deliberate. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in details most people never noticed. The distance between the trauma bay and the medication cart, the position of the exits, the flicker of a fluorescent light near the far wall that blinked every 11 seconds. She saw everything once. Then she stored it away. Dr. Callum Bridger noticed her that morning and dismissed her just as quickly. He had run this ER for 11 years. He had trained dozens of corpsmen. They usually came in one of two forms: overconfident rookies or burned-out veterans. The quiet ones made him uneasy. So he walked past her. "Harlow, Trauma 2 needs restocking, saline and gauze." "Yes, sir." That was all she said. She moved immediately. No hesitation, no attitude. Just work. Dale Briggs noticed her too, but for very different reasons. Briggs was the loud kind of competent. Broad shoulders, easy grin, the kind of confidence that filled a room whether it was welcome or not. He leaned against the trauma room doorway while Tessa restocked shelves. "You the new one?" he asked. "Yes." "Transfer from where?" There was the smallest pause. "Expeditionary." Briggs raised an eyebrow. That answer told him almost nothing. He studied her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You gonna keep up here?" he asked casually. "ER moves fast." Tessa closed the cabinet and looked at him directly. No challenge, no fear. Just calm. "I'll keep up." Then she walked past him. Briggs watched her go, amused. "Weird," he muttered later in the break room. Across the room, Chief Wade Carver heard everything. He didn't laugh. Carver had 22 years in the Navy, and the kind of quiet awareness that came from surviving long enough to learn when silence mattered. He had noticed Tessa the moment she arrived. Not because she stood out. Because she didn't. Her stillness wasn't nervous. It was controlled. Carver had seen that kind of stillness before, usually in people who had spent time somewhere most others hadn't. He said nothing. He simply watched. Days passed. Tessa blended into the rhythm of the ER the way a stone settles into a riverbed. She arrived on time, worked efficiently, spoke only when necessary. She didn't try to make friends. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just worked. But small details began to appear. She always sat with her back to a wall. She always faced the door. She ate lunch by the east window, overlooking the parking lot. Every single day. Briggs noticed that one afternoon. "You know you can sit with the rest of us," he said loudly. "You don't have to stare out the window like a cat waiting for birds." The room chuckled. Tessa paused at the door. She turned calmly. "I like the light," she said. Then she left. The laughter faded awkwardly. Carver turned a page in the chart he was holding. But he hadn't been reading. The first real test came a week later. A young sailor was rushed in, 19 years old, pale, sweating, barely conscious. Vitals were strange. Rapid pulse, low blood pressure, shallow breathing. Briggs took charge quickly. Heat stroke, he said confidently. Start cooling. The team moved fast, but Tessa didn't move right away. She stood beside the gurney with 2 fingers on the patient's wrist, watching something else. His chest. The left side wasn't moving the same as the right. Subtle. Easy to miss. Dr. Bridger entered the room. What do we have? Heat stroke, Briggs replied. Tessa spoke quietly. His trachea is deviated. The room paused. Briggs frowned. What? Shifted right, she said calmly. Left breath sounds absent. Bridger leaned over the patient. 4 seconds passed. Then he straightened. Needle, he said sharply. Briggs hesitated. You think? Needle Dale. The decompression happened seconds later. The hiss of trapped air escaping filled the room. Oxygen levels began climbing almost immediately. Tension pneumothorax. A fractured rib from an accident 2 days earlier had slowly collapsed the lung. If they had treated heat stroke first, the sailor would have arrested within minutes. The room slowly resumed motion. Tessa adjusted the oxygen line quietly. Bridger glanced at her. Good catch. Then he walked out. Briggs stayed behind. He stared at her for a moment. Could have been heat stroke, he said weakly. Could have, she agreed, and went back to work. Carver saw the change first. Not in Tessa. In Briggs. For the first time, the loud confidence had cracked slightly. Something about her didn't add up. 2 weeks later, the mystery deepened. It started with a sound. Not loud. Just a dull, distant concussion outside the building. Most people didn't react. Tessa did. Her head turned instantly, not toward the door, but toward the upper corner of the hallway where a threat would have the best angle. Her hand moved toward her hip. Stopped. Returned to the cart. The whole reaction lasted 1 second. Carver watched the entire thing. And then he noticed something else. The sleeve of her uniform had shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a scar along the inside of her forearm. Long, clean, old, not surgical. Carver knew what that kind of scar looked like. He didn't say a word, because people who carried scars like that usually carried other things too. And they revealed them only when the moment demanded it. That moment arrived 3 weeks later. It came in the form of a black pickup truck rolling slowly into the emergency entrance. The vehicle shouldn't have been moving at all. 2 tires were shredded. The driver's door swung open. A man fell out. 6'2", civilian clothes covered in dust and blood. 2 gunshot wounds. 1 shoulder. 1 thigh. Field dressings applied correctly. Tourniquet perfectly placed. The kind of work only someone trained could do. He had driven 11 hours like that. The gurney team rushed forward. Tessa reached him first. Pulse rapid but steady. Severe blood loss. He opened his eyes. Clear. Focused. He looked directly at her. Something flickered behind her calm expression. Recognition. The man tried to sit up. A paramedic pushed him gently back. Sir, stay down. The man raised a hand. Not aggressively. Just firmly. The paramedic stopped instantly. Then the injured man did something that made the entire trauma bay freeze. Despite the blood loss, despite the pain, despite the equipment attached to him, he straightened his spine and came to attention. Commander Harlow, he said hoarsely. Ma'am. The emergency room stopped breathing. Briggs froze mid-sentence. Bridger stood motionless near the door. Carver watched carefully. And Tessa? Tessa didn't react. Not surprise. Not embarrassment. Nothing. She simply looked down at the wounded man and said calmly, "At ease, Sergeant, you're bleeding out." Then she went back to work. The room, however, would never see her the same way again, because the quiet medic they had been ignoring for 3 weeks wasn't just a corpsman, and whatever she had been before arriving at Portsmouth had just walked through the door bleeding and saluted her. Why would a battle-hardened Green Beret salute a quiet Navy medic inside a civilian emergency room? The question hung in the air like smoke. No one wanted to breathe. For a moment, the trauma bay forgot how to move. Sergeant Daniel Reyes, the wounded man who had collapsed out of the pickup, was pale now, his strength draining fast. Blood soaked through the improvised bandage on his shoulder. The tourniquet on his thigh held, but not forever. Yet even as his body weakened, his posture had been perfect when he spoke. "Commander Harlow, ma'am." The words echoed inside every mind in the room. "Commander." Briggs was the first to break the silence. "What the hell?" "Pressure here," Tessa said calmly, already pressing gauze against Ray's shoulder wound. Her voice wasn't louder, but everyone moved. The room snapped back to life. Monitors beeped, gloves snapped into place, instruments clattered onto trays. Dr. Bridger stepped forward quickly. "2 gunshot wounds. We're moving to Trauma 3, prep for imaging." But his eyes flicked once toward Tessa. Not questioning, calculating, because something had shifted. Briggs grabbed the gurney rail as they wheeled Reyes toward the operating bay. He leaned closer to the wounded soldier, voice low. "You know her." Reyes didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Tessa. There was respect there. Deep, unshakable. "The best medic I ever served with," he rasped. Briggs blinked. "Served with?" He looked at Tessa again. She was already cutting away the man's shirt with trauma shears. Her movements were smooth, precise, efficient. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Like she had done this 1,000 times. Maybe she had. The shoulder wound was through and through. Clean entry. Messy exit. The bullet had passed close to the clavicle, but missed the artery. Lucky. The thigh wound was worse. The bleeding surged as she loosened the temporary bandage to inspect it. Not lucky. Femoral branch nicked, she said quietly. Bridger nodded, clamp. She passed the instrument before he finished the word. Their rhythm locked instantly. Clamp pressure, suction. Blood slowed. Reyes exhaled sharply but stayed conscious. "Sir," Briggs said cautiously, "you drove here yourself." Reyes gave the faintest grin. "Truck still runs." Then he coughed. Tessa glanced at him. "You shouldn't be talking." "Yes, ma'am." The room paused again. That tone. It wasn't polite. It was obedient. Carver stood near the doorway watching everything. He noticed the details most people missed, like the way Tessa's hands moved when she worked. Not rushed, not panicked, just certain. And the way Reyes watched her, like someone watching a commander in combat. Bridger finished stabilizing the shoulder wound and stepped back. "He's going to surgery," he said, "but he'll live." The tension in the room released slightly. Reyes leaned his head back against the gurney cushion. His eyes never left Tessa. "You disappeared," he murmured. Her hands paused for the first time. Just for a second. Then she taped the final dressing in place. "Orders change," she said. Reyes smiled faintly. "You always did say that." Briggs stepped forward, unable to stop himself. "Okay," he said, raising both hands. "I'm lost, completely lost." He pointed between them. "You're telling me our quiet corpsman here, used to outrank a Green Beret. No one answered immediately. Tessa removed her gloves slowly. Blood stained the latex. She dropped them into the bin. I was attached to a joint unit overseas, she said calmly. Briggs folded his arms. That's not an answer. Reyes chuckled weakly. It's the only answer you're getting. Orderlies arrived to wheel him towards surgery. Before they moved him, Reyes reached out. Not dramatically. Just enough to get Tessa's attention. Ma'am. She leaned closer. His voice dropped. They're still looking. Something flickered across her face. Gone before anyone else could catch it. Focus on breathing, she said quietly. Then she stepped back. The gurney rolled away. And the room erupted. What just happened? Briggs demanded. Dr. Bridger rubbed his temples. Carver leaned against the wall. But everyone looked at Tessa. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked calmly toward the sink. The water ran. She scrubbed the last traces of blood away. No one spoke. Finally, Briggs broke. Commander, he said. She turned off the water. That's not my rank anymore. But it was. Silence. Bridger crossed his arms. What unit? He asked carefully. Tessa dried her hands. Her eyes moved briefly across the room. Judging. Measuring. Then she spoke. Naval Special Warfare Medical Command. Briggs blinked. Like SEAL teams. Yes. The room shifted. The quiet corpsman suddenly looked very different. Briggs stared. You were a SEAL medic. Yes. Then why are you stocking gauze in my ER? That question lingered longer than the others. Tessa folded the towel neatly. Because the truth sat heavy behind it. And not all truths wanted to be told. I requested reassignment, she said finally. Carver spoke for the first time. Voluntary. She looked at him. A long moment passed. Yes. But something in that answer didn't settle. Bridger noticed it. So did Carver. Briggs, however, leaned forward with growing fascination. You're telling me you left special operations for this? She met his eyes calmly. People still bleed here. He didn't know what to say to that. The ER slowly returned to its rhythm. Patients arrived. Charts filled. Life moved forward. But the room felt different now. Because once you learn someone has walked through fire, you can't pretend they haven't. 2 hours later, Carver found Tessa standing by the east window. The same place she always ate lunch. The parking lot stretched below. Rain had begun falling softly across the asphalt. He stepped beside her. You handled that well. She didn't look at him. I handled a patient. Carver nodded slowly. That sergeant didn't salute you by accident. No. You commanded something. Yes. He waited. She didn't continue. Carver had seen interrogations softer than this conversation. Finally, he asked quietly, what happened out there? The rain grew heavier. Cars passed through the gate slowly. Tessa's reflection in the glass looked distant. Some missions don't end clean, she said. Carver studied her carefully. You lost people. Her eyes flickered. That was answer enough. War leaves shadows, she continued softly. Sometimes they follow you home. Carver didn't push further. People revealed pain in their own time. Instead, he nodded once. Well, he said, pushing off the wall, if another Green Beret shows up bleeding in our parking lot, I suppose we know who's in charge. For the first time all day, Tessa almost smiled. But as Carver walked away, her gaze returned to the rain. And to the words Reyes had whispered. They're still looking. Her reflection stared back from the window. Calm, controlled, but deep inside, something old had just begun waking up again. Because the past she thought she had buried had just driven 11 hours to find her. Bleeding and salooing. Why would a wounded Green Beret drive 11 hours to find someone who had supposedly left the war behind? The question lingered in Tessa Harlow's mind long after Sergeant Reyes disappeared through the double doors towards surgery. The emergency room returned to its usual rhythm. Stretchers rolled in, monitors beeped, nurses exchanged clipped instructions. But something invisible had shifted. The staff kept stealing glances at her now. Not openly, not rudely. Just curious. Because a quiet medic who had once commanded the respect of a Special Forces soldier was no longer just another corpsman stocking cabinets. Tessa felt the change immediately. Not because she cared what they thought, but because attention was dangerous. Attention meant questions. Questions meant history. And history meant memories she had worked very hard to bury. She stood again at the east window during the brief lull after the afternoon rush. Rain had stopped. The parking lot glistened under pale sunlight. Her coffee sat untouched beside her. She wasn't thinking about the ER. She was thinking about Reyes. And the words he had whispered. They're still looking. Her jaw tightened slightly. The past had a way of returning when you least expected it. Footsteps approached behind her. Briggs. Of course. He leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed, studying the parking lot like he suddenly found asphalt fascinating. You know, he said, most people put former Special Operations Commander somewhere on their resume. She didn't look at him. I'm a medic. That's not the point. Silence. Briggs exhaled slowly. You saved that sailor 2 weeks ago. You stabilized a double gunshot victim like you were tying your shoes, and a Green Beret salutes you like you're his battalion commander. He turned toward her. You're telling me none of that deserves an explanation. Tessa finally met his eyes. Not annoyed. Not defensive. Just calm. Does knowing it change how you treat patients? Briggs hesitated. No. Then it doesn't matter. She picked up her coffee and walked back toward the supply station. Briggs watched her go, frustrated but strangely impressed. Most people bragged. Most people needed recognition. Tessa Harlow avoided it like a landmine. Across the room, Chief Carver observed the exchange quietly. He had spent decades around soldiers. He knew what suppressed tension looked like. And he recognized the look in Tessa's eyes when Reyes mentioned someone still searching. That wasn't fear. It was preparation. Late evening settled over the hospital. The ER lights dimmed slightly as the night shift filtered in. Tessa was restocking trauma bay cabinets again when Dr. Bridger approached. He closed the door behind him. An unusual move. She noticed immediately. He leaned against the counter. You served how long with Naval Special Warfare? 7 years. And commanded. Toward the end. Bridger studied her carefully. You don't look like someone who walked away from that voluntarily. The words hung in the air. Tessa placed another saline bag on the shelf. Carefully. I requested reassignment, she repeated. That's not the same as wanting it. She paused. Bridger softened his tone slightly. You're exceptional here, he said, but people like you usually leave that world for a reason. For the first time, a faint shadow crossed her expression. Sometimes the mission ends, she said quietly. And sometimes it doesn't. Bridger didn't press further. He had seen enough veterans to know when silence meant survival. Ray should wake up tonight, he said instead. Surgery went well. Good. He asked for you. Tessa nodded once. Then she finished restocking the cabinet. Later that night, the hospital corridors grew quiet. Machines hummed softly. Night nurses moved like ghosts through the dim halls. Tessa stood outside room 214. Sergeant Daniel Ray's lay inside. Awake. Recovering. Watching the door. When she entered, his face relaxed slightly. You always did show up eventually. She pulled a chair beside the bed. You shouldn't have driven here. Ray shrugged carefully. Didn't have much choice. Hospital closer to where you were. Not one with you in it. Silence settled between them. Ray studied her. You look the same. That's unlikely. Still calm, he corrected, still quiet. He hesitated. Still carrying too much. Tessa ignored that. Who's looking for you? Ray's expression darkened slightly. Not me. Her eyes sharpened. Explain. He glanced toward the door before lowering his voice. You remember Kandahar. The word alone pulled something deep inside her chest. Dust, heat, gunfire echoing through narrow mountain valleys. A mission that had never officially existed. I remember, she said. Then you remember the extraction that never happened. Her fingers tightened slightly on the chair arm. Yes. She remembered that too. The night the sky stayed empty. The night they were left behind. Ray's continued quietly. Someone been digging into that operation. Why now? Don't know. His eyes locked with hers. But they're asking about the unit commander. A cold understanding spread slowly through her mind. Me. Ray's nodded. 3 weeks ago, a contractor approached one of our old guys, asking questions, offering money. Contractor for who? That's the problem, Ray said. Nobody knows. Tessa leaned back slightly. Her thoughts moved quickly now. Pieces connecting. They think something happened during that mission. Ray's voice was careful. Did something happen? Silence. Longer this time. The hospital machines hummed softly beside them. Finally she spoke. People died. That's war. Not like that. Ray's watched her closely. You saved us, he said. I did my job. You did more than that. Tessa stood up slowly. The conversation had reached a place she wasn't ready to revisit. You should rest, she said. Ray studied her carefully. You can't hide forever, Commander. She paused at the door. Her voice stayed calm. I'm not hiding. Then she stepped into the hallway. But as she walked away, her chest felt tight. Because deep down, she knew the truth. Some missions never ended. They simply waited. Outside the hospital, night settled across the parking lot again. Rain clouds gathered over the dark horizon. Inside, Tessa returned to the east window. The same place she had stood every day since arriving. But tonight something felt different. Not fear. Not dread. Just awareness. Like the moment before a storm finally breaks. Behind her, the ER doors burst open suddenly. Paramedics rushed inside with another stretcher. A young soldier. Severe injuries. Combat wounds. And as the team rolled past her, Tessa noticed something strange. The soldier clutched a torn patch in his hand. A patch she recognized instantly. A symbol from a unit that had officially been disbanded years ago. Her stomach tightened. Because that unit had been part of the same mission Ray's mentioned. The mission that never ended. The mission no one was supposed to remember. The soldier's eyes fluttered open as they passed her. And with the last bit of strength he had, he whispered something only she could hear. "Commander, they found it." Then he lost consciousness. And for the first time since leaving the battlefield, Tessa Harlow realized the war might not be finished with her yet. How could a mission buried years ago suddenly return, carried in the trembling hand of a dying soldier? The question settled into Tessa Harlow's chest like cold metal. The stretcher rolled past her quickly, wheels rattling across the ER floor as nurses cleared a path toward Trauma Bay 1. The young soldier looked barely 22. Dust-covered uniform, burned fabric along the sleeve, deep shrapnel wounds across his side. But that wasn't what held Tessa's attention. It was the patch clenched in his fist. A patch that should not exist anymore. The unit symbol had been erased from official records 6 years ago, files sealed, personnel reassigned, the entire operation buried under layers of classification. And yet here it was, in the hand of a bleeding soldier who had somehow found her. "Massive trauma," a paramedic shouted. "Explosion injuries, possible internal bleeding." The room snapped into action. Briggs moved to the patient's airway. Bridger pulled gloves on quickly. Carver stepped closer to the foot of the gurney. But Tessa didn't move immediately. She stared at the soldier's hand, at the patch, at the threadbare symbol that carried memories she had locked away. Then instinct took over. She stepped forward. "Get me vitals," she said calmly. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. The room obeyed. The soldier's pulse was weak, blood pressure falling, his breathing shallow and uneven. Shrapnel had torn across his ribs and abdomen. Bridger examined the wounds quickly. "He needs surgery now," he said. "Prep transport." The soldier stirred faintly. His eyes opened again. Cloudy, searching. They found Tessa. Recognition sparked through the pain. "Commander," he whispered. Briggs froze. Again. The word echoed through the trauma bay, just like it had with Ray's. Tessa leaned closer. "Stay with me," she said quietly. The soldier swallowed painfully. "They found it." "What did they find?" she asked. His fingers tightened around the patch. "The canyon, the crash." His voice faded. Then darkness pulled him under again. The monitors beeped faster. Bridger looked up. "He's crashing." They moved quickly. IV fluids, pressure, oxygen. Within minutes, the surgical team arrived and rushed the young soldier toward the operating room. The ER slowly exhaled again. But the silence this time felt heavier. Briggs turned slowly toward Tessa. "That's 2 soldiers calling you commander today," he said. She didn't answer. Carver noticed her gaze drifting toward the closed operating room doors, toward the patch now lying on the metal tray. He stepped closer and picked it up. The symbol was faded but unmistakable. A falcon diving through a lightning bolt. He turned it over. "No name," he said. "No unit number." Tessa finally spoke. "Because it never officially existed." Briggs blinked. "That's comforting." Carver studied her face carefully. "You know what he was talking about," he said. She nodded once. "The canyon." Briggs crossed his arms. "Okay, I'm clearly the only one confused here." Tessa hesitated. For a moment the room felt very small. And very quiet. Then she spoke. 6 years ago, a joint special operations unit was sent into eastern Afghanistan. Carver listened closely. Briggs leaned forward. "No official record," she continued. "The mission was reconnaissance. A drone had captured images of a crashed aircraft deep inside a remote canyon." Bridger, standing nearby, frowned slightly. What kind of aircraft? We didn't know. Her voice remained steady, but intelligence believed it was carrying something sensitive. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Weapons? Possibly. She glanced briefly toward the operating room. Our team was sent to confirm. Carver nodded slowly. And Tessa looked down at the patch in his hand. We found the wreckage. Briggs waited. And her voice dropped slightly. It wasn't just a plane. Silence. Carver's eyes sharpened. What was it? She exhaled slowly. A surveillance aircraft. Bridger frowned. That doesn't sound unusual. It wasn't ours. The room went still. Briggs stared. You're telling me a foreign spy plane crashed in Afghanistan? Yes. And your unit found it? Yes. Carver's voice stayed calm. Then what happened? For the first time, a shadow crossed Tessa's expression. The mission changed. How? New orders came through command. She paused. They wanted the aircraft destroyed. Briggs shrugged. That sounds normal. Tessa looked at him. It wasn't normal. Why? Because the plane wasn't empty. The words landed like stones. Carver leaned forward slightly. What was inside? Tessa's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Technology. Bridger frowned. What kind? Something no one wanted falling into the wrong hands. Briggs rubbed his forehead. So you blew it up. That was the plan. She looked toward the floor. But we never got the chance. The room waited. Her next words came slower. Before we could destroy it, another team arrived. Carver's eyes narrowed. Enemy forces. No. She met his gaze. Americans. The silence turned cold. Briggs stared in disbelief. Wait, another U.S. unit? Yes. Why? That's what we asked. Her fingers tightened slightly. They claimed they had new orders. Carver spoke carefully. And those orders were. They wanted to take the aircraft intact. Bridger frowned. That doesn't make sense. It didn't to us either. Briggs leaned forward. So what happened? Tessa's eyes moved toward the dark window at the end of the hallway. Like she was seeing another place. Another time. There was an argument. With the other unit. Yes. And her voice grew distant. Then the canyon exploded. The room went silent again. Carver studied her carefully. Exploded how? Missiles. From where? She shook her head slowly. We never saw the aircraft that fired them. Briggs blinked. You're saying someone wiped out both teams? Yes. How many survived? Tessa didn't answer immediately. Her eyes returned to the patch. Then she spoke quietly. 3. Briggs inhaled sharply. You raise. And one other. Carver's voice was low. The soldier who just arrived. Tessa nodded. The third survivor. The ER felt colder now. Briggs ran a hand through his hair. So someone destroyed that canyon to hide whatever was inside that plane. Yes. And now someone is asking questions about it. Tessa looked toward the operating room again. And someone just found the wreckage. The meaning settled slowly across the room. Carver spoke first. If that plane is still there, then whatever it carried might still be there too. Briggs muttered under his breath. Which means the people who destroyed the canyon might come looking again. Tessa didn't argue. Because she knew something they didn't. Reyes had said someone was already looking. And now a second survivor had arrived. With proof. Outside the hospital window, thunder rolled across the distant sky. Storm clouds gathered over the dark horizon. Inside the ER, Tessa felt something she hadn't felt in years. The quiet tension of a mission returning. Because if the wreckage had been found, then the past wasn't buried anymore. And whoever had fired those missiles 6 years ago would not want survivors talking. Why would someone try to erase an entire mission and then come back years later to finish the job? The question settled over the emergency room like a shadow that refused to leave. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but growing closer. Rain began tapping against the hospital windows in slow, uneven drops. Inside, the ER staff moved carefully through the night shift. But nobody was really focused on their work. Not after what Tessa had just revealed. Briggs leaned against the nurse's station, staring at the dark hallway leading to the operating room. "So let me get this straight," he said quietly. 6 years ago your team finds a crashed spy plane in some Afghan canyon. Another American unit shows up, and then somebody wipes the whole place off the map with missiles. Tessa stood beside the medication cart, checking supplies she had already checked twice. "Yes. And now 2 survivors just happen to show up here on the same day." "Yes." Briggs rubbed his temples. "That's not comforting." Chief Carver remained silent for a long moment. His mind was moving faster than the conversation. "You said 3 people survived the canyon," he said. Tessa nodded. "Reyes, the soldier in surgery." "And you?" "Yes." Carver's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which means if someone wanted to erase the past." Tessa finished the sentence for him. "They would need all 3 of us gone." The room went quiet again. Briggs exhaled slowly. "Well, that's fantastic." Dr. Bridger walked out of the operating corridor just then, removing his surgical cap. "He's stable," he said. Everyone looked up. "The young soldier will live," Bridger continued. "But he lost a lot of blood. He'll be unconscious for a while." Tessa nodded. "What's his name?" Bridger glanced at the chart. "Private Lucas Hale." The name struck her immediately. Hale. Memory flashed like lightning through her mind. A younger soldier standing near the canyon's edge years ago. Thin, determined, nervous but brave. She had almost forgotten his face. Almost. Briggs noticed the change in her expression. "You know him?" "Yes." Carver leaned closer. "He was part of your team?" "Yes." "And he survived the canyon too?" Tessa's voice stayed calm. "He was the youngest one there." Bridger folded his arms. "So now we have 2 survivors under this roof." Carver looked toward the dark hospital windows. "Which means the 3rd survivor might be next." No one said the obvious truth. The 3rd survivor was standing right here. For a moment, the hospital seemed too quiet. Then the sliding ER doors hissed open. Everyone turned instinctively. A man walked inside slowly. Civilian clothes. Dark jacket soaked with rain. Late 30s. Clean haircut. Sharp posture. Not injured. Not panicked. Just observing. His eyes scanned the room once. Quick. Professional. Then they settled on Tessa. Something inside her chest tightened immediately. Not fear. Recognition. The man approached the nurse's desk. "I'm looking for someone," he said politely. His voice was calm. Controlled. But there was something behind it. Briggs stepped forward. "Visiting hours are over." The man smiled faintly. "I won't be long." His gaze shifted past Briggs. directly to Tessa. Commander Harlow. The name landed like a gunshot in the quiet ER. Briggs slowly turned. Carver straightened slightly. Tessa didn't move. The man walked closer. Each step measured. Rainwater dripped from his jacket onto the floor. "You're difficult to track down," he said. Tessa's voice remained steady. "I'm not hiding." "Of course not." He stopped a few feet away. Up close, the man looked ordinary. But his eyes were not ordinary. They were the eyes of someone who spent a long time studying people before deciding whether they lived or died. Carver stepped subtly to Tessa's side. "Can we help you?" he asked. The man glanced at him briefly. "Just an old acquaintance." His attention returned to Tessa. "You remember me?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." Briggs looked between them. "Anyone want to explain what's happening tonight?" The man chuckled softly. "My name is Adrian Voss," he said. The name meant nothing to Briggs. But Carver saw the tiny change in Tessa's breathing. That was enough. Voss continued calmly. "I was hoping to speak privately." "No," Tessa said. He raised an eyebrow. Direct as always. Her gaze never left his. "Why are you here?" Voss glanced toward the operating corridor. "Because one of your old soldiers just made a very interesting discovery." Briggs whispered under his breath. "Oh, great." Tessa's voice sharpened slightly. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should the wreckage of that aircraft," Voss replied. The room went still. Carver's voice dropped. "You're the one asking questions about the canyon." Voss smiled politely. "I represent people who prefer certain pieces of history remain forgotten." Briggs scoffed. "So you're the cleanup crew?" "Something like that." Tessa stepped forward slightly. "What do you want?" Voss' tone stayed gentle. "The location." "Of the canyon." She shook her head. "You already destroyed it." "Yes," he said calmly, "but apparently not well enough." Thunder rumbled outside again. Rain intensified against the windows. Voss clasped his hands behind his back. "Your young soldier found the wreckage again," he continued, "which means the technology inside might still be intact." Bridger frowned. "What technology?" Voss ignored him. His eyes stayed on Tessa. "My employers would prefer that discovery remain quiet." "And if it does?" she asked. The smile faded slightly. "Then complications occur." Briggs stepped forward angrily. "You're threatening people inside a hospital." Voss looked mildly amused. "Of course not." He nodded toward the hallway. "I'm simply asking for cooperation." Carver's voice hardened. "You're not getting it." Voss sighed softly. "I had hoped this would be easier." He reached into his jacket pocket slowly. Briggs tensed. But Voss didn't pull a weapon. Just a small photograph. He placed it gently on the counter. Tessa looked down. Her stomach tightened. The image showed the canyon. Recent. The wreckage clearly visible among the rocks. And beside it, a military drone hovering in the sky. Voss spoke quietly. "The world is about to rediscover something it was never meant to see." Tessa lifted her eyes. "What happens if we say nothing?" His voice remained calm. "Then others will come asking the same questions." Briggs muttered again. "This night keeps getting worse." Voss stepped back toward the exit. "I'll give you time to think, Commander." Rain poured harder outside. He paused at the door. "Oh," he added lightly, "and you may want to move your surviving soldiers somewhere safer." The room froze. Voss smiled faintly. Because not everyone asking about the canyon will be as polite as me. Then he stepped out into the storm. The ER doors closed behind him. Silence returned. Briggs stared at Tessa. Well, that felt like the beginning of a disaster. Carver looked toward the operating room. Reyes and Hale lay unconscious inside the hospital. Both survivors. Both targets. Tessa stood very still. But inside her chest, something old had awakened again. The same feeling she had before missions began. The quiet moment before everything changed. Because tonight had proven one thing. The war she thought she left behind had finally found her again. And this time, it had followed her all the way home. Why would a man like Adrian Voss walk calmly into a hospital unless he already believed the battle was over? The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour. Water streaked across the emergency room windows, blurring the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. Inside the ER, no one moved for several seconds after the doors closed behind him. It felt like the air itself had changed. Briggs was the first to break the silence. "Well," he muttered, staring at the door, "that was the most polite threat I've ever heard." No one laughed. Tessa was still looking down at the photograph Voss had left on the counter. The canyon. Even after 6 years, she recognized the shape of the cliffs instantly. The twisted metal of the crashed aircraft was still there, half buried beneath rock and sand. The missile strikes had scarred the mountainside, but they hadn't erased everything. And hovering above the wreckage, the drone. Someone had found the site again. Which meant the past wasn't buried. Not anymore. Chief Carver spoke quietly. "He's not bluffing." Tessa nodded. "No." Briggs ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, forgive me for stating the obvious, but some shadowy guy just admitted his employers blew up a canyon and now want the survivors to stay quiet." He pointed toward the surgical hallway. "And we've got 2 of those survivors lying in beds down the hall." Dr. Bridger crossed his arms. "This is a hospital," he said firmly. "No one's getting hurt here." Tessa finally looked up. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "They won't attack here." Briggs frowned. "How do you know?" "Because hospitals attract attention." She slid the photograph across the counter. "They'll wait." Carver studied her carefully. "You sound certain." "I am." A pause settled over the group. Then Briggs asked the question that had been hanging in the room all night. "So what do we do?" Tessa didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the east window again, the same place she had stood every day since arriving at the hospital. Rain ran down the glass in thin streams. For weeks, she had used this view to remind herself that life was quiet now, that the chaos of war existed somewhere far away. But tonight the quiet felt temporary. Fragile. Carver approached beside her. "You're thinking about going back." It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. "If that aircraft is still intact," she said quietly, "whatever was inside it could change a lot of things." Bridger joined them. "You said it was surveillance technology." "Yes. But advanced enough that someone destroyed an entire canyon to hide it." "Yes." Briggs whistled softly. "That's above our pay grade." Tessa shook her head. "Not anymore." She turned toward them. Reyes and Hale found the wreckage again. Carver nodded. "And now people like Voss want it gone." "Yes." Briggs crossed his arms. "So your plan is what? Fly back to Afghanistan and dig up a crashed spy plane?" Tessa met his eyes. "No." "Then what?" Her answer came quietly. "We finish the mission." The words hung in the room. Briggs stared at her. You left that world for a reason. Yes. And now you want to jump back in because some mystery plane crashed 6 years ago. Tessa looked toward the surgical hallway. No. Her voice softened slightly. I'm doing it because people are still being hunted over it. Silence. Carver finally nodded. That I understand. Bridger exhaled slowly. You realize none of us are soldiers. Tessa gave a faint smile. Good. They looked confused. Because this isn't about fighting, she continued. It's about telling the truth. Across the hallway, a nurse stepped out of room 214. Sergeant Reyes is awake, she said. Tessa walked down the corridor quietly. The lights were dim now, the hospital settling deeper into the night. When she entered Reyes' room, he was sitting upright, pale but alert. You saw him, he said immediately. She nodded. Adrian Voss. Reyes' jaw tightened. Then it started. Yes. He looked toward the rain-covered window. They'll keep coming. I know. He studied her carefully. You thinking about going back? Yes. Reyes smiled faintly. I figured. He shifted slightly, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. You know Hale didn't just stumble onto that canyon. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Explain. He was looking for it. Why? Rey's voice softened. Because he never believed the mission was finished. A long silence followed. Then Rey said something unexpected. You remember what you told us that night? Tessa frowned slightly. No. He smiled. You said sometimes the mission isn't about destroying something. What is it about? Making sure the truth survives. Tessa looked down briefly. That had been a long time ago. Back when the canyon burned and the sky lit up with missiles. Back when survival had felt like a miracle. Reyes watched her carefully. You saved us that night. I kept you alive. That's the same thing. He leaned back against the pillow. You're going back to that canyon, aren't you? Yes. Good. She frowned slightly. That doesn't worry you. Reyes chuckled weakly. No. Why not? He met her eyes. Because the people chasing us think the mission already ended. Thunder shook the windows again. But they forgot something, he added quietly. What? Reyes smiled. You're the one who never leaves a mission unfinished. Tessa stood there for a moment, letting the words settle. Then she turned toward the door. Get some rest, she said. He nodded. You too, Commander. She paused briefly. Then she stepped back into the hallway. The hospital lights hummed softly overhead. Somewhere down the corridor, machines beeped steadily beside sleeping patients. Life continuing quietly. The kind of quiet she had tried to protect. Carver waited near the nurse's station. Well, he asked. She looked toward the window again. The storm outside was beginning to pass. Clouds thinning. First hints of moonlight breaking through. They're right, she said. About what? That the canyon still matters. Carver nodded slowly. So what happens now? Tessa took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the path ahead felt clear. We make sure the truth gets out before they bury it again. Briggs walked up beside them. I have a bad feeling I'm about to get dragged into something dangerous. Tessa looked at him. You don't have to be. He sighed. Yeah, but now I'm curious. Bridger shook his head. This is the strangest night this ER has ever seen. Tessa glanced once more toward the operating hallway where Reyes and Hale rested. 2 survivors. two living pieces of a story someone wanted erased. Then she looked out at the clearing sky. Because sometimes the loudest heroism isn't explosions or gunfire. Sometimes it's a quiet decision made in the middle of an ordinary room. A decision to stand up again, even after the war is supposed to be over. Tessa Harlow had spent weeks pretending she was only a medic now. Just another quiet face in a crowded emergency room. But dignity, like truth, rarely stays hidden forever. And as the storm clouds drifted away above the hospital roof, one truth returned with perfect clarity. Some missions aren't about victory. They're about responsibility. About protecting people who trusted you to lead them home. And sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones who walk away from war. Until the moment they're needed again. Because sometimes courage doesn't shout. It simply stands up quietly and finishes what it started. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.